I have a board and the Zoom just
Yeah.
for backup.
All right.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I have with me Dr. Doug Novotny. You're in, where are you? Northern California, right?
No, yeah, East Bay area, San
That's what
Francisco
I
Bay
thought.
Area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a psychologist practicing, and we've crossed paths a couple of times through Open Therapy Institute, and I think a couple other interfaces. I'm not sure, but what really struck me was he wrote an article for Open Therapy Institute entitled "Cultural Misunderstandings on the Misuses of the Term Culture," and it was outstanding, like absolutely exceptional. So exceptional that I forwarded it to a bunch of people I don't normally forward things to because I just don't care to invoke debates. I just want awareness. But this was so good and so straight down the middle and so poignant toward the motif of let's remove politics from our work life in this profession that I thought, man, everybody needs to read this. So we're going to talk about that article and the origin story thereof, and some of the maybe the friction that we've seen since then. But before
Yes.
that, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit further than just psychologist in the East Bay?
Hi, Jake. Hey, thank you. High praise. I appreciate it coming from you, especially. Introduce myself. Yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist. I was also trained in cultural psychology at the University of Chicago. That's where my interest in culture grew. And I run a private practice and also an educational website called Your Positive Sum. And I've been interested in tackling all this culture stuff and the failures in our field for a long time. And I've been doing it gradually for 15 years, actually. And I've very much accelerated that process in the last couple years to the point now I'm really coming out of the closet, as people say,
That's
um,
awesome.
much more. So this article was a part of that.
Okay. Why? Why culture? What does culture mean? Let's get into it.
Yeah. I was so interested. I mean, one of the main reasons I went to graduate school was that I was fascinated by belief systems and people's, you know, uh, tendency not to fully understand their own, even though they're acting on them. And I found this great place, University of Chicago Committee on Human Development, where Jonathan Haidt studied, by the way. We crossed over 1 year and we were trained by the same guy in what culture is. And I found this to be super rich, very interesting, applicable to anything in our society, but yes, including clinical work. And I originally was going to be a professor, but I was disenchanted with academia. And so when I decided to get this psychology stuff turned into practical skills and clinical work, I was always tracking this training I had got in culture and thinking, wow, this would really apply well to clinical work. But I became aware over the years that this model of culture that is anthropological and that is very rich, in my view, was absent, almost absent in clinical training. And most psychologists were operating in a totally different view of what it was and using the same word culture, but talking about something totally different, namely identity politics, right? I think we're all familiar with this. People will talk about black culture, white culture, say multiculturalism, when really what they mean is people of different races are in the same room, right? Or in the same society, our own. Maybe somebody's an immigrant. Sometimes it gets a little more interesting than just talking about race, but usually it's a stand-in for that trait. And so, yeah, that's the short version. I was trained in this one thing, and I kept saying, "Wait, where is it in psychology? If we're doing a rich and engagement with human beings, we really ought to know what they're like in their rich texture of their being, including their backgrounds." But but the culture piece was so wrong, I thought, and so that's what this paper was about: is trying to contrast two very different view and incompatible views, basically, of what culture is and define it properly.
If we are to define it properly, we have to admit our own subjectivity to it, right? So your history, your background, your training, your education speaks to a depth and breadth of the term culture that is more than surface level labels. And
Yes.
I would agree with that because I think in when we say culture, it's a very robust, holistic description of a person's experiences. And I would almost argue that it's not generalizable to a group of people.
Hmm.
And I think what's happened is we've taken groups of people with identifiable traits, some of
Yes.
them um, literally skin deep, like the
Yes,
color of their
exactly.
skin,
Right.
and some of them just characterological, and some of them based on, excuse me, hobbies or interests. And then what we do is we cast this label upon them in a big blanket form. And then what it does is it presumes to know everything that we can know about an entire subset of the population. And that's it. We don't have to dig any deeper. And
Yes.
out of that, I think we make presumptions and judgments and conclusions that just simply aren't true. And I think what we're doing when we do that is we dishonor the individualized experience. So it's very interesting, this juxtaposition of what culture, and I'll put that in air quotes for the listening
Hmm.
audience. The video audience can see me put air quotes on culture. Culture today, with air quotes around it, means immutable traits uh, that are sometimes literally skin deep, sometimes just observable behaviors. And then simultaneously, out of those same people's mouths, they'll say, my lived experience, right?
Right. Yes.
And it's like, well, those are mutually exclusive terms because if I'm asking about your individualized experience, then I must inherently discard what I think culture is and have to listen to what you tell me it is. So is this what you're getting at? Because it seems like that's what you're getting at. And then
Yeah.
how do we reconcile the subjective nature of both of those?
Hmm. That's a tough one. That's really a great question because so much of this, yeah, is incompatible and internally, even in, we say their definition, right, of what culture is. On the one hand, it's objective, it's given to you at birth. And on the other hand, you get to claim whatever you want it to be, and it's based
Right.
on your subjective experience. This can make a person feel crazy, because I think it is crazy making. But you point out to this thing, which I didn't really define it, right? People may read the article, but let's assume they haven't, right? And it won't be in the course of our conversation. The two cultures that I set up as a contrast is trait culture. This idea that you would be defined by, say, your skin tone or other demographic traits, and a meaning system culture. So, I think properly defined, culture is a meaning system. There's all kind of metaphors for it. But like, they say that's the water in which fish swim, or it's the matrix from the movie. There's a lot of ways to understand it, but yeah, it's a set of rules and norms and understanding about what a person is and how you grow up and all the rich stuff of every day. How children talk to their parents, how you get married, what you do in rituals when people die, all the really fascinating stuff of life. That's a rich meaning system. And it's very different than trait. Yes, absolutely. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so wrong. It's dehumanizing. And what I actually said in
Yes.
the piece is that it's a fetish. This was what I think new, at least I haven't seen others describe it this way, that in a psychological sense, the trait culture is a fetish about what culture should be. And the analogy is pretty strong. We can get into that. But the point is that it's it's to make everything concrete that should be abstract, and it's dehumanizing and it's narrowing and it's a failure to understand. A funny line that captures this to me is that whole identity politics thing. Douglas Murray, a great interview. I don't remember with whom at the time, but I heard him say this event occurred that Peter Thiel, right? He's this thought leader, tech leader, political guy, and he's gay. But apparently, this major gay magazine said Peter Thiel is not gay. He just sleeps with men.
Because he didn't fit the trait
Right?
culture.
Exactly. So this is,
Okay.
to me, a great example of what, their view of identity is so skin deep or surface level or categorical in a trait way, and often in a political manner, that it doesn't capture the human being. So let's say we were friends with or doing clinical work with Peter Thiel. I think it'd be pretty important that we understand him to be gay, right?
Yeah.
But here they are like taking away this aspect of him, which is pretty important. So that's just one example.
There's so many directions we could go. I almost went earlier toward ego and ego defense and ego fragility and all that stuff. And I'd like to maybe touch on that later. It's a little bit of a tangent, but
Yeah.
my question to you is, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I want to hear it out of your mouth. Why this trait culture as opposed to honoring culture in the way that you're describing it with the how did you say that? Beliefs, values, something.
Meaning system.
Meaning systems culture. Yeah. So
Yeah.
why now? Why is this a fetish? And please explain what you mean by fetish, because we hear that in some, and everybody, of course, is going to think sexual fetish because that's what
Ah,
our
yes. Ah,
culture
good.
has told us it is, right? But there are many types of fetishes, and so
Hmm.
please go on about that.
Okay, sure. I'll get into the why after making that clarification, but
Sure.
of course it will be way more speculative, right? Because reading another person's mind is tricky. We get ideas.
No,
We
no,
get
I do
ideas
that
and
all the
clues.
time.
And I certainly think about it. Okay, it's a great question, but just to kind of set that stage, fetish. What do I mean by fetish, right? People think sexual stuff. It is not meant to be a kink. It is not meant to be purely sexual. But it comes from that in psychoanalysis, right? So let's take the classic idea of a foot fetish and then expand it out to what we're talking about when we come to culture, right? Foot fetish is what? It's what I call at least two things. It's the narrowing and the concretization of desire. So if I feel for somebody sexually, or if perhaps hopefully I have a greater love for them as a person, but the way I experience that is through a foot fetish, then what I'm doing is I'm narrowing it visually down to the and I make it concrete. I'm attracted to the foot, to the person. And as therapists, we ought to care about that. And we know how to deal with desire, help people become more nuanced and deep and all that good stuff. But the point here is that that is a narrowing and a concretization. And it could be true about feet, genitals, skin tone, a lot of things, but that's the focus on a trait or a thing. It reification is the right. It's taking a abstract thing as if it's concrete. It's a big problem. So okay, that think of when I say fetish. Make sense?
Doug,
Then
hold
that's
on
why
a
you can see
second.
the analogy to this view of culture.
Hold on a second. There was a
Hmm.
huge glitch there when you
Oh
explained that
no.
whole thing. Um,
Oh crap.
would you,
Something happened
do
in the
you hear?
video?
Yeah, it was the whole feed. So you sounded like a robot. And
Oh
Safisa
crap.
will clip this out, but would you mind repeating? Just
Okay.
your bars are going from red to yellow. They weren't
Really?
doing that when we were talking in the beginning. Now it's
Oh
like your
crap. Tell you what,
internet's
I have
wobbly.
I have a VPN. I'm going to turn it off
Oh yeah, let's do that.
in case that's it.
That may be it.
And
I was looking up
shit. Oh
fetishistic
crap.
disorder.
Great. So now so that whole answer. So you'll clip it that what you want me to begin by answering what is a fetish for you?
I'd say just start over. And what do you mean by fetish? Because that's right when the glitching started, and it's usually I just ride through it, but it went
Nah.
through like 90 seconds, and I was like, "Well, this is worthless."
No, that
Um,
and it's really important point. So let's see.
just so people
You'll
think I'll just tee it up with
yeah,
people
yeah.
think sexual, but it's not always sexual because our and I'll say that the DSM specifically says over a period of at least 6 months, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from either the use of non-living objects or a highly specific focus on non-genital body parts. The fantasy sexual urges or behaviors cause clinically significant distress. And then it goes into cross-dressing,
Right.
devices, tactile genital stimulation. So the DSM tells us that it's specific to sexual, but
Uh-huh.
I can have a softball fetish, I can have a baseball fetish, I can have a sandwich fetish, right?
I
And
think so.
I would like to know what your definition is on that because I think it's really quite good before we had our technical glitch when you were
Yeah.
talking about narrowing in on something. So go ahead
Yeah.
and
Okay.
let's
So I'll kind of
recover
let's
that.
see what I can answer about that. And yeah. So right. I think it may be so that it's typically talked about, and even the DSM talks about it in sexual terms, but it is much broader than that. For sure. I agree that you can have a fetish on a lot of things that aren't um, overtly sexual. We might think that it's sexual in the sense that desire is, at least analogous to sex, if not
Fair.
somehow primarily driven by, depending how much you're wedded to that old psychoanalytic view of desire in general. But um, but it doesn't have to be that. And by the way, Marx was somebody else who was really interested in this. He talked about commodity fetishism. But
Mm,
but I think we shouldn't get to that. I'm not really an expert on Marx. I studied him a bit. The point is this, that yes, it really can be non-sexual or can be at least expanded out to understand on a more abstract sense, not just about the act of sex or sexual desire. So here's the analogy and why I say fetish. You clip where is good for us. Um, the Foot fetish is the classic example, and I think it makes it very easy to understand how the concept of fetish, as I'm using it as applied to culture, is this, that you might have a love for a person, hopefully an abstract and very warm, full, whole person love for them. But at a part of that, your sexual desire could get narrowed and concretized into the foot. So that's the classic of a foot fetish, that you wouldn't just be sexually attracted to a person, but to a foot. You'd be focused on that fetish. And so that's physically narrowed in a visual sense. You can even picture it, that you're seeing the foot and not the whole person. And on the abstract level, you're focused on the thing, the foot, not the whole person, the human being. And so in these two ways, it's bad news. It's dehumanizing. It's not taking the whole person literally, physically, and it's not taking the whole person on a more abstract level. And that is how fetish then applies to culture more broadly, because instead of paying attention to you, Jake, I see you, white man. I see your skin. And I'm not seeing what's below the skin, right? Which is really what I think the most interesting thing about you, or things about you, all the aspects that make you up. Is your skin a part of you? Yes. Is a foot a part of a person? Yes. Can you find it attractive? Sure. But the fetish part is to narrow and to concretize.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. What do what do we do then? Because I think I asked the why question. I know you didn't want to mind read. Um,
Oh, I will.
I think we
Right?
should speculate at least,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
I
We
have
all
some
do.
hypotheses too.
Uh-huh. So the why question is, why would this occur, that we would be in a period of time, decades now, I think, where a kind of what I'm saying, fetishized, or at least trait model of culture has predominated. Um, one of the main reasons I think is that, let's just kind of start with the easy and the more psychological and the more generous of heart. It's easier, right?
Yeah,
Why does a person fall into a fetish or become attracted to concrete parts of things or oversimplified aspects of humans? Because it's easier and it's comforting in a certain way, depending how you feel. It's harder to take the whole person, including the parts I don't like. Um, and so we all slip into this to some degree, don't we? Um, Beyond that, I think what we have to recognize right away is that identity politics is the key word, isn't it? Because it's a political thing. It's a political thing and driven, I think, by political motives very often to group people and to analyze them as members of group, as members of blocks, like voting blocks. And especially if I'm going to be crafting a political strategy or an advertisement, I'm going to think, who is this going to appeal to? And one very easy way to do that is to look at demographic traits. And the more politics has taken over our society and our field, the more we think in these terms. Um, but I don't want to do that, right? I don't think this is a good way to think about people, and certainly not clinically. You shouldn't be thinking about them as a demographic group or a voting bloc or even a voter. You should be thinking about them as a human being. And so that's one of the reasons that I think it's happened. Yeah.
that's very well stated, and I appreciate that. It reminds me of back in college when I ran for student government office,
Yeah.
and we were talking in those same terms. Race didn't play in as much as the fraternities, right? Like,
Okay.
oh, we got to get the Greek vote,
Yes.
right? We
Uh-huh.
got to get the student athlete vote, as if they're all monolithic.
Uh-huh.
So for
Yeah.
the listening audience, you know I've said this before if you've heard me, at any length. I work very closely with the firearms community, and we could say firearms culture, right? So one of the things that Walk the Talk America does is we're bridging the gap between mental health and firearms. So what is
Yeah.
mental health? What? Community, culture, profession. Firearms, what? Community, culture, profession. Not
Uh-huh.
everybody who owns a firearm is a professional at it. Not everybody who deals in mental health is a professional. So what is it? What are we trying to talk about here? Well, you use heuristics. A heuristic
Uh-huh.
is a mental shortcut.
There.
And the mental shortcuts are useful to make snap decisions, conclusions in real time that need, expedient answers, that kind of thing. They're
Hmm.
not great for human depth and understanding, though, and
Right.
especially in a world where we, you and I operate, where we're trying to help people explore their own depth so that
Uh-huh.
they can achieve greater, get out of their own way, change their maladaptive behaviors. We have to go deeper than just labels.
Hmm.
And if we are teaching the students in grad school that you not
Yes.
only can, but are encouraged to view people in broad swaths based on labels, the heuristics take over, and then to your point about how it's just easier, yes, that's an ego thing. The ego wants what's easier and wants what it knows, wants
Hmm.
to be certain, wants shortcuts. Um, it's harder to let go of what we think we know based
Okay.
on heuristics and shortcuts and
Yeah.
labels and surface descriptions to go deep with a person because that requires intimacy.
Hmm.
Intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires risk. Risk of what? Pain. You might be wrong.
Sure.
You might have to change your mind. This
Ouch.
heterosexual white man in front of you
Yes.
may not be what your avatar of him was created to be. He may
Yeah.
be much deeper than that. He may be very complex. He may not actually be heterosexual. He may be play acting because it was impossible for him to come out of the closet as gay because his culture didn't allow it, right? So
Yeah.
if we just take the heuristic shortcuts, what we're doing is you're right. We're dehumanizing.
Hmm.
We are limiting
Hmm.
who we're dealing with. And I, for one, I find it morally reprehensible and unethical, and probably it's malpractice if we open our clinical sessions with limiting labels, because
Yes.
we've just in short we've said you're
Yes.
not capable of more than the box I put you in, right?
Hmm.
So I think you're right about that. It is just easier. That's the Occam's razor solution. It's easier.
Hmm.
But I think there might be something more sinister and pernicious behind it. And I appreciate your political analysis because if the nature of politics is to be transactional, to
Hmm.
achieve wins, victories,
Hmm.
if you will, on one's own terms for one's own desires, uh, agenda,
Yes.
then we lose the humanity.
Uh-huh.
And it's necessary to lose the humanity in politics because you get lost in the complexity and nuance of humanity, and all of a sudden you can't fight people who you
Yeah.
see commonality with. So I think it's
Right.
almost inherently necessary to put labels on people to gain political goals or victories because
Hmm.
you have to by nature dehumanize them in order to win.
Hmm.
Because there's an inherent fight, especially in a two-party system, we'll call it. I don't
Nice.
like that, but I think that's where we are. Curious your
That's
reflections
right.
on that,
No, that's right. Right. It is a zero-sum game, is how I think of it in my model. That
which is unfortunate because that's not what psychotherapy is,
it should not be.
but it's becoming that way,
It's
right?
becoming that more, but politics is. Right? Politics is. And so
Politics
we,
is,
we
yeah,
have to accept that. And that's one reason why I don't want to be political, right? Even though politics plays a part in this whole discussion, it does affect us. Of course, we have our political sides to us, probably each of us, but I don't want to fall into that. Culture, in my definition, is much richer. And it
yeah.
would involve all the nuance of this. So yes, you can be an avatar, like how you said that. And that's what the trait model of culture not only allows for, but foments. This is the problem. Daniel Hannan has a great quote of this, the English politician. He says that, and because I think this is true, what you're saying, is that something like the the richness of Western liberal values, where you'd appreciate people for their full humanity and you wouldn't just you be tribe against tribe. This has to be taught to every generation. The natural course of events, and most of human history, has been about tribe against tribe,
Correct.
and I'm against you because of where you were born or what group you're a part of, not because I happen to disagree with you on something that's more substantive. And this has to be taught to every generation because the natural psychology and the natural tribalism is to fall into this pre-modern thing. It has to be taught. And now we're not teaching it. In fact, we're teaching the opposite. And our field
Right.
is a big part of that. We're actually teaching people who are meant to have a deep human connection with their client to open up in the initial session quite often with a dehumanizing trait level flat view of what identity is by forcing people into categories and labels. It,
It's
it is
really
morally
amazing.
reprehensible. I like that you said that.
It is. It's unethical. It's malpractice, I think, because you're going the opposite direction of what the patient or the client portends to enter into the relationship seeking, right?
Mhm.
They're seeking depth, they're seeking understanding, they're seeking healing, whatever they're seeking.
Yeah.
And I, as the clinician, if I adopt this philosophy of trait culture, what I'm doing is the opposite. I'm saying, no, I know what's best for you based on
Yeah.
what I've already preconceived, based on
Yeah.
what I found in some book. And that's all there is. And there is no more.
Yeah.
Because if there is more, then I have to change my mind.
Hmm.
and I'm too weak to change my mind. Is essentially what I'm saying. I want to read something.
Okay.
Um, I forwarded this to a whole bunch of people, and one wrote me back with the following. I'm not going to identify the individual.
You wrote what?
This email I forwarded your article, and this is the
Oh,
email
the
that I got
article.
in
This is a
response
response to the article. Okay. Yeah,
to
good.
to me personally.
Uh-huh.
Uh, just got around to reading this. Want to send my reaction as a cordial response. I don't know how cordial it is when you hear what it says. I
Okay.
have to say, I strongly disagree with what is being said. While you stated that this viewpoint is taking the quote politicization out of our field, it would seem that it is actually putting right-wing politics pretty front and center. So already we have a judgment about what the article is saying, even though it's not saying that.
Uh-huh.
It is also very problematic that the author, and then parenthetically, upon researching his bio further, is what appears to be a white heterosexual male and is making judgment calls on culture and ethnicity and the best ways to go about defining and discussing both in our field. So
Yes.
now we've got the very
Yes.
limited labeling based on surface level demographic design,
Hmm.
uh, and then drawing conclusions based on that. So this person has already dehumanized you as the author based
Hmm.
on surface level traits, and there has been no further research into you. So it tells me probably the article wasn't really read. And as a Mexican slash Native American non-binary individual, I have a very difficult time with others outside of the BIPOC or LGBTQ plus groups trying to make judgment calls on what is best for those within these groups. That's not what the article said.
Hmm.
But we can see the shadow projection coming out here. Um,
Yeah.
this individual reads into it something that's not present, places their own insecurities front and center,
Hmm.
wraps themselves in defense mechanisms based on your physical appearance alone. That is it. And how she knows you're straight, I have no idea because I don't know that. I mean, maybe you say you have a family somewhere, but that's a drawn conclusion based on scant information.
Hmm.
And then denigrates the article's content with ad hominem, right? So there's no argument against the ideas. There's an article against you based on labels put upon you and labels based upon this person putting them on themselves and ignoring his or her own depth,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
it's quite remarkable what's going on here.
It
To
is.
be frank, sorry, to be quite frank, the whole article read as a disguised attempt at colonization and the erasure of identities to try to promote them as, quote, experiences in order to avoid acknowledging identities. That's
Uh-huh.
just not true. That's the exact opposite of what you're proposing. You're proposing that
Hmm.
people are deeper than their stated surface level identities. There is
Yeah.
no erasure. There's an exploration of depth. So to me, I think, and then they go on to say, our jobs as therapists are always to ask about individual experiences and how much this impacts clients, in addition to recognizing client identity and how much this may all. The
Oh,
argument just folds in on itself.
yeah.
Um, and then there's some sanctimonious conclusion of, I understand that you were trying to be helpful in sharing this, but I really ask that you consider sharing sources from BIPOC or LGBTQ plus individuals and let them
Uh-huh.
speak on how they would like to be. It's like, so you do want an individual representing an entire monolithic demographic, although it is monolithic, as though it is monolithic.
Hmm.
No one else can speak to that because this person has singularly defined what it means to be part of the demographic that they have chosen it to be,
Right.
right? Absent any depth or nuance. It's quite fascinating this inversion of the argument based solely on self-selected criteria. It's it's
Uh-huh.
it's very it's very remarkable the mental acrobatics that are going on, and yet that's exactly what's happening in our field. And I can't make that up because I literally experienced it. Right, all I did was forward this and be like, hey, look, this person's talking about the depth of everyone, but it blows up the worldview of people who need the labels to
Yes.
stay safe in their egos. Because if you're deeper than the label that's been applied, I got to change my mind. And that's too
Hmm.
scary, apparently. So,
Hmm.
um, reflections on that, if you would.
Yeah, wow. It's a troubling kind of message, yes, for so many layers and many of them contradictory. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that you say maybe didn't read it, but did enough to get angry, at least,
Right.
but didn't notice that this person put what as a blank person, right? Labeling him or herself.
Self-labeling. Yep.
which actually was one of the examples I think is in the article. I know that was in an early draft. I'm pretty sure it was in the final article that this was an example of one of the problems with this trait model of culture is that you do a lot of labeling and that it's dehumanizing in that sense. And the classic example, well, not classic, it's not that old, but more recently, one of the common examples is when people begin sentences this way, speaking as a,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And I think you're right to say that I'm very interested in the depth, cultural meaning, including the nature of groups that might embody cultural meaning systems, right? So that it could be true that a person has a certain identity or group affiliation or moral history or religious commitment or upbringing in a different type of place in the world, different family structure, etc. All of that really rich stuff. Yes, of course, we're interested in that if we're interested in humans. And as a cultural psychologist, I'm keenly interested in that. But I'm not interested in summarily getting rid of that by thinking that it's all based in the trait, speaking as a.
Well,
So,
this is a binary thinking, right? It's
yes,
either this or that. It's all or
correct.
nothing. And I think that's where
Yes.
we create a lot of anxieties and
I suppose.
personality disorders when we get into, you know,
Hmm.
all Jews love the state of Israel. It's like,
Hmm.
careful with that.
No,
All
yeah,
Christians believe that women should never teach from the pulpit.
right.
Careful with that. And so the binary nature of these statements,
Yes.
all blacks must vote for whoever. It's like, careful with that.
Hmm.
So you have all it takes is one to falsify this statement. One
Yes.
person comes out and says, I don't fit that mold. So,
Yeah.
I say, as a gun owner, it's like, whoa, careful. You're starting to speak on behalf of all gun owners, and there's
Uh-huh.
110 million of them. They're probably
Right.
not all like you.
Right.
Um, when you have one that falsifies the statement, the individual making the statement therefore has to integrate that new information
Hmm.
and expand consciousness, or reject the new information and slide into delusion. Because now you're denying reality. The reality is that this other individual, and probably many more,
Yeah.
don't fit your mold.
Right.
So if you don't do that, if you don't integrate the new information, which I would say this response to the email is clearly doing, they're not integrating the new information because I know
Yeah.
plenty of people in both of those, we'll say acronym cultures, BIPOC and LGBTQ plus,
Yes.
who would sharply disagree with
Yeah.
that statement. If you don't integrate the new information, you're essentially psychotic because psychosis is a departure from reality. Delusions, which is a belief in something that's not real,
Yeah.
is a part of psychosis. And if you're denying reality,
Mhm.
spoken testimony of a person who says, "I don't fit what you just said,"
Yes.
then you're delusional. And I think that creates a problem because now we're teaching people to invite binary thinking
Binary.
as though it's truth. It's like, no, it's
Exactly.
not. This
No,
is
this is
literally one of the
very
things we
nicely put.
don't we don't do in
This
this
is
field.
very nicely put, Jake. I'm glad you brought this up. I hadn't been had it in my mind, but I actually have a continuing education course. It's a 3 hour course, and it
We should
starts.
probably promote that.
I probably should. Like maybe that's what I'll do here for this. It's yeah, exactly. I'm not good at promotion, but that's fine. So thank you for the tip. The point is that in this 3 hour course, I talk about this very thing that one of the structures that I use to develop what I call a more nuanced or structurally intelligent view of culture is Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory. I think this adds
Okay.
a lot of richness and texture and ways of talking about differences of opinion, not just being the same as another person, but doing it in a rich, multifaceted way. But the other main structure I use is what I call a four-dimensional structure. And the first dimension is when you have just a binary, because then you're on a flat spectrum, right?
Okay.
And everything gets dichotomized.
Sure.
Even
Yeah.
things like statistically speaking, even things that aren't dichotomies,
Yeah.
right? And we do this sometimes.
Well,
We
yeah, it's
oversimplify
another
things for good
heuristic,
reason.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, like our our mutual friend Josh Slocum would say, supply your own not alls. It's
Ah,
like, but I can make blanket statements that are mostly true most of the time, 90,
yeah.
95, 98%.
Yes.
I'll use a
That's
baseball
funny.
analogy. If you routinely throw a baseball with your arm below your elbow below your shoulder, you're not
Yeah.
going to get very much velocity on it.
Okay. Right.
And then somebody will pull it out. well, this guy does it fine. He's a
Sidearm, blah
submarine
blah. Yeah.
pitcher. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
in the
Yeah.
major leagues. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, supply your own not-alls. But generally, I'm not going
Right.
to teach that because it doesn't work on the whole,
Interesting.
right? So there's our
Interesting.
binary, right? It's
Okay.
not always binary, but supply your own not-alls. Sorry, I
Nice.
just wanted to throw that
Not
in
all.
there.
No, that's good. So this is that kind of thinking being used against us, right? If we
Mhm.
are trying to make a categorization or an oversimplification, a heuristic, as you said earlier, to make a point, fine, do so. And then somebody else comes up with a not all. It's like, I don't want to engage in all in your nitpicking if
Right.
I'm just making a point. The problem I think comes because we all do this. We all make oversimplifications. Purposely, we dichotomize things that aren't dichotomies for statistical reasons or whatever. But we need to keep that clearly in mind. The problem with this whole culture as trait thing is that it doesn't keep it in mind. And then when somebody writes an article
Correct.
that tries to get more rich, people get all fired up about it and they say, "Well, you're erasing me." I say, "I'm not erasing anything. I'm trying to make this more complicated and rich, you know? And you're the one doing the erasure in your dichotomization." And so, fine. And even that people would group up, with a tribe or with people who they feel affiliated with. I don't even think that's necessarily bad. It depends on context. But of course, we all do this, right? And so that's fine. But you have to recognize that you are doing a one-dimensional move there, and it's flat. It's dehumanizing if you don't do it carefully, and you have to recognize the other dimensions. The second dimension is the vertical pole, things like morals. If I'm not just an avatar of a white skinned person. I am white, but I also have a whole depth of character to me, and it's on this vertical pole. And so now I've moved out of the flat, unidimensional, and uh, what did you say? Binary pole. Right. And so that's the second dimension. And it enriches me. It makes me deep in ways that are important. And that's what moral foundations theory does. So this was just kind of to give an introduction to how I want to say, yes, of course we dichotomize. Sometimes we oversimplify, but man, we have to be careful because that road leads to bias, prejudice, exclusion, dehumanization, even things like genocide. When you start treating
Yeah.
people as the other, it gets scary quick.
Yeah, well, and anxiety, right? It leads to mental illness.
Yeah,
Binary thinking is one of the hallmarks of anxiety because if you're
nice.
only seeing two options and neither of them are good, or neither of them fit your worldview or your paradigm, and you're missing all the other options in between, it's a it's a really troubling place to be.
Hmm.
And thankfully, we have things like postmodern philosophy, right? Postmodern philosophy as
Yeah.
a thought practice is a good idea to get people out of binary thinking because you go, well, what if that's not true, right?
Uh-huh.
What if those two options are not the only options? The problem with postmodern philosophy as it's applied to policy, for example, where nothing is true
Yeah.
and everything is a construct, and we're
Yes.
all just making up our own realities as we go,
Uh-huh.
is that becomes a different level of crazy making where
Yes.
there's no anchoring, there's no mooring. And I think
Yes.
what's going on in our trait culture is both are happening. There's a binary being created. You're
Yeah.
either in my group or you're not in my group. And oh, by the way, my group represents everything I say that it represents, and I'm going to silence all the people who disagree with me.
Hmm.
And nothing is real. There is no anchoring. We're going to
Right.
deconstruct it all.
Yes.
And I'm the sole author of this. Like, well, you just made yourself God of your own universe. That's
Yes.
what a great position to be in, right?
Wow.
Good luck making friends, by the way, because
Nice point.
because you've just dehumanized everyone.
Uh-huh. You said this earlier. It's really nice. It's just so internally incoherent.
Right.
And Coleman Hughes makes this point really nicely at one point years ago that this postmodernism, critical theory, some of these ideologies that I think do underlie. This is another answer to your why question. Why is it happening? Because but I'm getting off track. We'll come back to that if we want. Um, Coleman Hughes's point, and I think yours, is that something like postmodernism says there's no real. It's all
Yeah.
just a social construct. It's all just, language makes things so. But and in that is a kind of nihilism. But then
Yeah.
they say, but this is an orthodoxy. This is the way you have to view it. And
Right.
and and then if challenged, they just say, well, we don't believe in rationality anyway. That's whiteness. It's really a mind screw.
Yeah. Well, and that's how you get a lot of, like I said earlier, crazy making because nothing makes coherent sense. You can't make a linear argument out of that. Especially when you default to something like whiteness, right? It's like this whole whiteness thing. It's like, well, what kind of white? Like even our own U.S. government can't figure out what it is, like white non-Hispanic or white Hispanic. It's like,
Right.
well, that's a binary. It's actually a
Exactly.
trinary. So, I think what we have to do, to maybe try to solve this. My hope is that we invite people to do hard things, mentally
Okay.
hard things, like
Right.
hold two thoughts that seemingly are incompatible but nonetheless coexist.
Yes.
Guns and mental health. Guns
Uh-huh.
and mental health. It's not guns or mental health.
Uh-huh.
Prior to Walk the Talk America's work, those two were not in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Now they
Yes.
are. And we've proven it because I walk into a room and it's like, oh, you're a concealed carry gun owner who's also a therapist. Bzz, bzz, does not compute. Well, it better start
Exactly.
computing because I'm standing in front of you, right?
Nice.
When you get the, white, heterosexual, Christian male therapist who thinks in a nuanced way and has compassion and, you
Hmm.
know, is fairly progressive in most of the ideas, like, well, now you're starting to lose boxes.
Yes. Yes.
What else does he do? Well, he does a lot of things. So we are not one thing. We are not a few things. We are many things, and I think, more
Hmm.
importantly, we are capable of all things. So there's that old saying that
Right.
says, if a human being has done a thing, the thing is human nature. You being a
Ah,
human have the same nature as anybody else, so you have the same potential for all things great and terrible.
nice.
If we start teaching people about the infinite capacity of the human psyche, then I think we're going to inevitably dissolve the labeling that comes along with it. I don't think that we can do that through the academic institutions at this point because they're too committed to the identity politics
Uh-huh.
because it gives them a sense of power and control, as you alluded. The orthodox, it's like you shall fall in line or you shall be gone.
Right.
That's a very powerful, manipulative, coercive dynamic. So if we can just send the message like, hey, just if you want to work in this field, go ahead and just get through grad school, smile and
Hmm.
nod, smile and nod. Those people have no effect over your life once you graduate. Then get out and you can actually meet human beings for the
Yep.
depth of what they are. The
Yep.
marketplace will be richly rewarding those folks. I
Hmm.
don't think the marketplace is really interested in having labels put upon them and then
Hmm.
being told that they're bad for said labels, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's the solution. What do you think the solution may be?
That's really good. To build things, to do hard things
Yeah.
is what you, I think, began this with, this question. Yeah. So what is the solution? That is a big part of the solution. Absolutely. Um, and maybe to get more to this speculation about why, right? And answer it. At the same time, I don't know if you're a proponent of this theory that the Frankfurt School of Marxism is lurking in the background of many of these discussions.
Yes. Yes, it
I
is.
I, I think it is. I think that that's a part of the answer of why things became political, why it's come primarily or early through the academy, and why we're talking about things like BIPOC and identity politics. Because, and by the way, we can link this to psychotherapy too, through the difficulty of dealing with loss. Um, but let's try to actually. That's a lot to demand in an answer, isn't it? Let's see if I can do
No,
it.
go for it.
Let's. I just realized I'm
We have
really
at least 15 minutes.
setting myself for a fall here. Yeah, that the Frankfurt School of Marxism, some won't know, was a group of people who were dis unhappy that Marxism had not taken over Western societies. And they decided that the economic theory of Marxism was not going to bring down capitalism. They decided to take down the West using the corrosive effects of identity conflicts. Sound familiar? They thought that things like race and sex were seams in the Western society with problems, you could say, which they could put wedges in and really tear things apart and bring us down. So that's what they did, very much on purpose, over a period of these decades, the last 60 years, especially. So that was their plan, not just something that happened. This isn't me talking, this is them, right? And so that I think was a very purposeful and insidious strategy to take down the West in the service of Marxism. And I think that it helps to explain why we're spending so much time talking about identity and identity divisions in this trait model of culture, um, and why it's so wrong. And why it's political too. So that's part of the answer. Um, But what? What else did I want to do? I wanted to link it to, so that's a part of the why question. And I feel like I may have lost one of the threads, but the other was this issue of loss. The reason I think that it matches, I might think of the third thing, or you might remind me if we come to it, but the reason it matters a lot for loss, momentary aside, right? In psychotherapy, we care a lot about loss, don't we? We
Yeah.
often think that that's one of the main things we're doing is we're helping people deal with loss and mourn it. And that when you cannot accept a loss, you run into psychological trouble. And
Yeah.
this can be obvious when, you lose someone you love. It can be not so obvious when, you can't achieve a life goal you've had, or when you come to terms with giving up something in yourself that you once held dear, all that kind of complicated stuff. That's dealing with loss. And these Frankfurt School of Marxism people, in my interpretation, refused to accept the loss. So
Mm.
at the origin of this
Hmm.
movement is a refusal to accept loss. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see this problem in society today, including in the political realm. People won't accept the loss of an election,
Yeah, you're
etc.
right.
Is that they said, oh, there's nothing wrong with Marxism. We just haven't forced it on people well enough. And so we're going to go attack the West in a different way. If they had gone back and said, wait, what's wrong with Marxism that it hasn't worked out the way Marx said? Uh, Maybe they could have found something there that was useful and still retrieved or found a way to preserve something in the theory of which they liked. But they didn't do that. They didn't accept the loss. I think that's one of the really seminal problems in all this. So what do we do? Is your question. We do hard things. And I think a part of your acknowledgement there is to say that you're not always going to succeed, that it is hard, and that you're going to have losses. And you're building. You're building when you say do hard things. Whereas they are not building, they are tearing down, they're corroding. They were going after Western society, and they've been trying to take us down for these many decades. And postmodern theory, critical theory, the Frankfurt School, they're corrosive ideologies. Queer theory, especially, is a corrosive ideology. It doesn't build anything. And that's why I think what you're talking about is a great antidote. This is what we have to do. We have to build and we have to do hard things. I love it.
Building is scary because you stand for something. Anytime you stand for something, you open yourself up to attack and critique. And if you don't know well with a high degree of intentionality why you believe what you believe, why you created what you created, then you're going to find yourself on your heels real quick in the face of the critics. And that's a scary position to be in. Fear being one of those 10 core emotions that most people don't deal with anyway. If you can't tolerate the fear, if you can't tolerate the onslaught of the criticism, then you're going to crumble. And then the attackers win. It's bullying 101, right? Why do bullies bully? Because they themselves are insecure. They see something in the other person that they don't like, so they're going to tear them down. They're going to criticize them openly. They're going to throw rocks at them. They're going to throw sand on their face in the playground. They're going to pick on them. They're going to trash talk them to their colleagues. It's mean girl stuff, right? And
Yeah.
so this we'll call it cultural Marxism. I think it aims to redistribute not wealth through the economic true original Marxism, but to redistribute the what is perceived as power and privilege, right? So if
Yes.
you can tear down something, then somebody redistributes it. Well, who's the somebody doing the redistributing? Somebody who's a little more equal than the other people they thought were
It's
equal,
always
right?
the Leninists and the Maoists who are in charge. Yeah.
Always. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I got to believe that the people who are part of this movement, who are true believers, and not just flying monkeys who've been indoctrinated, right? And they don't know any different. The true believers all believe they will be the ones doing the distributing, all
Yes.
of them. So then it becomes this crabs in a bucket thing. And I think you see that in
Hmm.
academia. There's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of
Hmm.
rug pulling, a lot of just completely dishonest, disingenuous, intellectually empty discussion, debate,
Yeah.
attacks, teardowns.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it's penetrated our field now in the form
Oh,
of the email
yes.
that I received, where it's like, no, you're the
100%.
bad person for forwarding this, you white
Uh-huh.
person. It's like, thanks for being a racist, like that you didn't think you were.
Exactly.
And
Proving my point. Yeah. Just like
yeah,
all the protests over Jonathan Haidt he just spoke at NYU. Did you see that? And
no.
yeah, he did the commencement. And
Who
he, of course,
protests Jonathan Haidt?
well, exactly. The students, were protesting the fact, well, a lot of things, but, he's saying one of his main, if you just know one thing about him, he's against coddling, of
Yeah.
young people. And there they are. How dare you say something I don't like and you be
Well,
platformed by
yeah,
the
yeah,
university?
there's some serious shadow projection going on there.
Exactly. No, that's very nice. And you bring it back to our field too, because we're talking a bit about politics and sociology. Culture on this broad scale can take us there, but we need to bring it back to the clinical realm too, right? And so let's say um, we have to be careful as clinicians. We have a bit of power, don't we? People come to us vulnerable.
Quite a
And,
bit.
and it's extremely important that we hold our professional responsibilities um, strongly, not to impose, not to use that power, or we could become like, what did you just say? All the I say Leninists and Maoists, but whoever the people are destroying this society, they think they're going to be the ones to get to recreate it next.
Well, it's the animals who are a little more equal than the other animals, right? It's the pigs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
So
here's
we
the
better
problem
not
as I
do
see
that in
it.
the
Yeah,
therapy. I'm sorry to
I
talk over.
right,
We better
totally.
not do that because just because we have a theory, we better not tell somebody how they should conceive of themselves in their identity.
Yeah, but Doug, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that we are being told that we hold the moral high ground. The grad
Oof.
school students who are coming out are being
Yeah.
told that they are righteous and holy, and the poor,
Yeah.
downtrodden clients, patients who come seek their services just need a little more education to be told
Yeah.
how to live rightly, right?
Oof.
So I don't think that they're even aware that
Uh-huh.
such a dynamic has existed prior to this. Because if you do, they retreat to something approximating, well, that's white supremacy, because our field's ethics came from European white males, and therefore they're
Yeah.
all bad because we've decided they're bad.
Right.
It's like, okay, so you've just positioned yourself as the authoritarian in the room, and
Hmm.
sanctimoniously so that you're
Yes.
going to tell your patients that they just need to re-educate themselves on your terms, right? This is
Right.
very narcissistic. It's very, very narcissistic. And I got to believe that the hope lies in the idea that the broader public who's consuming this from us
Uh-huh.
will just wear out of that because
Okay.
at its core, it's unhealthy.
Hmm.
And I think people know that intrinsically. I think they know it
Hmm.
unconsciously. Most people don't want to be deconstructed. They want certain things deconstructed for the purpose of analysis, right? That's fine.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not opposing deconstructing as a whole. I'm opposing deconstructing a person's character without building something in its place. I
Okay.
can deconstruct your trauma so you can make sense of it, but then I'm going to help you reconstruct your identity so
Yes.
that you're free of that traumatic effect, right? That's the whole point. But
Yes.
postmodern deconstructionism doesn't create. It
Uh-huh.
only destroys. And I got to
Yeah.
believe that humanity as a whole is sensitive to that and knows that it's sinister and pernicious and runs afoul of human existence generally. So
Hmm.
similarly, this is the same hope that I hold for artificial intelligence and a lot of the AI stuff that's going on, from computer generated graphics to movies to music to everything. I think that the human soul, the
Uh-huh.
spirit of humanity that's
Yeah.
evolved below these 40,000 years of our current iteration as Homo sapiens,
Yeah.
I think that we will eventually wear out of the artifice and we will unplug. We will
Huh.
just discard it. We'll go back to analog. We don't like digital, right? So,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
similarly, in this cultural Marxist takeover of psychotherapy and the humanities, and it's starting to encroach into the sciences, but the sciences don't have as much patience or tolerance for it. The only way to get it in there is to coerce people into it.
Hmm.
I think that the marketplace will grow sick of it. The marketplace is not going to be interested in AI chatbots. The marketplace is not going to be interested in somebody proselytizing for deconstruction of their own culture, right? Their
Yeah.
their actual culture. No, you just need
Uh-huh.
to question everything that your family's 5 generations has taught you.
Well,
What?
right. God, I hope
I
you're
was here
right.
because I was sad that I lost my job. Well,
I hope
jobs are white supremacy.
I hope well, exactly right. All part of the capitalist system. Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, inherent there is a kind of masochism that's being called upon you to
Quite.
embrace, right? That you should feel bad for who you are, and you should have a land acknowledgement for the fact that you're in this place that was, formerly populated by other people, or that,
By the tribe we picked, by the way.
well,
Not any
exactly
of the other
because
ones that preceded that
all the ones
tribe.
that they were trading, conquering each other and in brutal manner, right? But that's never discussed, right? Or that because our field comes from Europe and from predominantly white people, that would make it bad, or that would make it white, so-called, according to the trait model of culture. Let it be true that, and this is where, that person who wrote you about my piece, fails to pick up on something, which, by the way, I'd like to do something maybe to irritate conservatives that I'm seen as some kind of right-wing guy, that I'm talking about culture like in a favorable manner. I'm not saying, we should ignore culture.
Yeah.
I'm saying we need to embrace it properly.
Yes.
And so, example, if Freud and everyone after him in our field is overly Eurocentric, you could say, or overly individual focused, fine. People like you and others are interested in family dynamics, right,
Yeah.
in the therapy room. And maybe sometimes, very often, a family intervention is better than an individual one. Certainly, we should be conceptualizing people as members of families and as part of a broader culture, etc. That's great. And perhaps that was overlooked in the previous iterations of our field. Because of why? Because of a
Totally.
kind of a cultural bias towards which, we have to acknowledge,
Yeah.
focus on the individual. And I think that's wonderful. It's one of the great products of Western civilization is that we would have an individual as the actor in society and the holder of rights and dignity and all that. But it has its bad parts. And what I like to point out is that conservatives, I say this in the CE too, because I try to take on both sides. Conservatives have a lot to learn from culture, and we ought to stop in pretending that we can. We make fun of postmodernists for being internally incoherent. It is also internally incoherent to say that I'm just an individual.
Yeah.
No, you're
Yeah. I'm a
not.
self-made man. No, you're not.
Exactly. Winnicott, had said there is no such thing as a baby. And I say there is no such thing as an adult individual either, not for long, without a society and a culture. And this
Yeah.
whole idea that I'm just an individual is a cultural norm.
Yeah.
And if you don't acknowledge that my idea of myself as autonomous and separate is a broader cultural thing, you see the incoherence, then you're doing something really wrong. And we need to be able to embrace it. And I think conservatives can when we don't talk about systems like systemic racism, but we talk about culture and society and things like, you know, beliefs, religious belief systems. We talk about the family. That's the first system.
Yeah.
And we talk about society, we talk about community, not in the community organizer sense, but we talk about community in, yeah, and these are, you get my point, I think, that I think it's an example where conservatives have to really wake up and fast if we're going to succeed in this, because we can't just, uh, as conservatives, give up the whole field to people who claim that they're representing the community or society or the culture.
For sure. To borrow from DBT, they use this observe and describe technique, right? When a thought enters your head, you don't judge it. Well, similarly, we want to observe and describe culture and acknowledge what its impact is without um, denigrating it, erasing it, invalidating it, minimalizing it. So
Nice.
you don't have to change it. You just have to notice that it's there. And I think all too often conservatives tend to just ignore that it's even a thing. Or if they do, they put a different label on it and cast it aside and say, that's not what we're about. We're Americans. Americans require you to check your culture at the door. Leave that,
Uh-huh.
Mexican flag hanging in Mexico. It's like, don't
Yeah,
you have an
right.
Italian sticker on your car? Right. Like you're super proud of mom's pasta recipe, and that tuku that she made, but
Good.
so what is it about the Mexicans you don't like, right?
Right.
And they
Right.
can't answer that. So it's like we can acknowledge the cultures that move and are cohesive without denigrating, deconstructing, trying to
That's right.
replace, modify. And I think that's really important for our work as clinicians, so that when somebody comes in, we do, as you know, and that's one thing that the author of that email got right is they said our jobs as therapists are always to ask about individual experience and how this impacts
Yeah,
clients, in addition to recognizing client identity and how this may also impact them. Absolutely.
absolutely. Right
Absolutely.
there. Yeah. In addition,
Then
that's
why
the,
was the rest of the email even necessary,
right.
right? That's the whole
Right.
thrust of the, it's like, yes, I want to be curious. I want to ask. And then when I ask about your identity, I go, what does that mean to you and where'd you get it? because
Yes.
I default to intentionality. I don't want people walking around unconsciously believing
Right.
things that are say maybe not true. They're living a life of lies,
Okay.
constantly self-shaming because their parents told them they were a no good piece of nothing, and now they're
Yeah.
an adult who thinks he's a no good piece of nothing. I'm like, oh, it's just my identity. I'm just a foul up. You know, it's like, well, where'd you
Uh-huh.
get that? Whose voice is that? Because I don't. That
Right.
doesn't seem to track with nature. People
Uh-huh.
don't come out of the womb believing that they're screw ups.
Right.
Oh, it's my diet. It's my identity. Can it change?
Uh-huh.
Where did it come from? Who gave
Right.
it to you?
How
Did you
nice.
self-adopt that? Right?
And there you are as a therapist, not just taking at face value what somebody claims about themselves, but they are, because we're all
You
mixed
mean
up,
I'm not
right?
affirming? I'm not affirming
Not
your
just affirming,
self-shame?
yeah, you're a mess up. You're a
Well,
foul up. Okay.
nothing I can do here.
No.
Pay me my
Right, right.
$150, please.
We are multifaceted inside, right? And that's what a depth view of culture and of character understands, and including deeply contradictory aspects of ourselves, right?
Yes.
I'm not just one thing or many things all in the same direction. I'm a big mix up, and we all are. So that would be true too for the broader culture. So you said earlier the what do you call it, morally reprehensible to treat people according to these labels. And I think I said a minute ago something about the masochism you're being called upon to embrace. And this is a moral thing too. This is, you know, a article I wrote at Fair, right? What was it called? The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This was advertising my CE, right? Doing a little promo actually. Um, the idea that moral foundations theory is a part of the way I conceptualize things, partly because these are moral things. And just like we don't, as conservatives, I don't even know if that's how you describe yourself, but we don't cede the ground to the people who claim culture. We don't cede the ground to people who claim moral high ground either. And I believe that's why the author of that email responding to me might have been so angry, because I do not cede that ground. I do
Right.
not think, oh, they're the moral ones trying to reform society and bring about, social justice. I put in quotes, right?
Yeah.
I don't, no, no, not at all. You have your view of justice. Fine. I have mine. Let's hash it out. I do not think that at all that we should be going around apologizing for our privilege, for our whiteness, for our colonialism, for our Western
Self-flagellating.
culture. Have we made mistakes? Are there things that we should redo and think about better? Hell yes. But that is not to cede the moral ground. I think we have a thousand reasons to be very proud of our culture and of our heritage and of ourselves. And if you're not embracing that, you're not doing something good for yourself.
I think that's a good place to end. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. Sure. It's great
Hey,
talking to you.
why don't you revisit where people can find you if they so desire?
Yeah. Um, so I have this website, it's just going up called yourpositivesum.com. Sum, S-U-M, as in the game theory. I don't do any other social media to speak of now. I'll be on X soon,
Good
but
for you.
that website is a place to get. You could actually sign up and take as a home study my CE course. And I have a Substack which has only one entry. That will be adding more soon. And you could get it also through the website. But that's just a place where I have some of these ideas um, outlined and many more to come.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doug Novotny, PhD. Appreciate your time and a very good, robust conversation. I always learn things from these interviews. That's why I love doing podcasts. I certainly don't do it for the money because it costs me money to do them.
Oh
Uh,
man.
but I appreciate you. And thank you all for listening. Share this around if you found it interesting. If you liked it, please leave a rating and a review, preferably a positive one. I don't need your negativity. If you have something negative to say, just email me. I'm pretty accessible. On behalf of our Dog and Notes family and the Zephyr Wellness family, we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye bye.